question of the day is Australia in for another influx of boat people? We know last week a dozen were discovered by our patrols in the seas. They had been promised passage to Darwin and instead were unceremoniously dumped at an Air Force base in remote Western Australia. Firstly, what a jip. Secondly, they tell us that each of these, and most of them were Bangladeshi. We know from UN reports that the refugee camps in Bangladesh are absolutely teeming with people, so one might assume that's where they've hailed from. They tell us that each of them paid $8,000 US. I'm not sure what kind of asylum seekers have that much money on them. You don't really think of them as wealthy people, but when they tell you how much it costs to get here, you're like, what were you doing before you arrived? But of course, the main concern is this being the 10th boat that has arrived since May of last year. Is this a new route that has been discovered? The Daily Telegraph reports boat hides have been cut into the mangroves. They are getting to know the coast very well. They, talking about the people smugglers, don't come in big boats. They come in little 30 to 40 foot blue boats. These are the first guys making it to the mainland in a long time, but this could potentially be a new way of getting them in. So they've wisened up, and why wouldn't they? When in just the last Labor budget, they cut $600 million out of the border protection regime that we had in place. They advertised to all and sundry, we plan to abolish the temporary protection visas, and they didn't set up adequate surveillance, maritime surveillance, to avoid this kind of thing from happening. So we might as well, at this point, just write to the people smugglers and say, Labor's back in case you hadn't noticed. Now's a good time to pop on by.
Well, on the inadequate surveillance thing, it does surprise me that this boat managed to get to Australia, because I would have thought Anthony Albanese would have spotted it from his RAAF jet flight. He probably flew over it 6 times in the last couple of weeks.
Boat of some kind.
But this, of course, has given Peter Dutton a great line. Dutton used this line today. He said, the Anthony Albanese government has stopped the economy and started the boats. That is a good line that I reckon we'll hear more of if this continues.
It is a good line. And the issue you have here is if you're a people smuggler or a potential people smuggler, because what we're talking about here are Indonesian fishermen who have been coming down and fishing a bit closer to us, and at the same time going, hey, there's a passage here that we can use. We've got the mangroves, as was noted in the Daily Telegraph, where we can cut out hiding places so we don't get detected. And you've got a stream of people who obviously want to come here. And you'd have to think that the events we've seen in the last month, with all these people who've been let out of detention, has sent something of a message that, well, perhaps this government is a little softer than the previous government and even the government before that on boats coming into the country. Because the government before the election stated once again that Operation Sovereign Borders was not going to go anywhere. We commit to it. Rudd committed to it back in 2013. It's been a mainstay of Labor policy for a long time because they know how electorally poisonous it is to allow these people back into the country. But the bat signal that they've been sending over to Indonesia and over to Bangladesh isn't communicating that message. Clearly. And that's how we've ended up here.
Well, they've got a potential perfect storm here because you've got a whole lot of Palestinian refugees being brought into the country. That's quite controversial. You've got long-term detainees, many of them terrible criminals being released into the community. Now you've got the spectre of boats arriving, and in charge of all of this, who have you got? You've got Claire O'Neill, who's proved absolutely hopeless, and you've got Andrew Giles as the immigration minister, who's not fared much better. So this is the last thing the government needs.
100%, but it's a massive win for the opposition. And Dutton is doing a perfect job of playing it like a fiddle. You never waste an emergency. And that's what this is coming to a head for the Labor government. We've seen that in the latest polls. That really put the wind up them, I think. So obviously now is a time that they're like, look, we're roughly halfway through our term. Now we've really got to pull the stops out. But at the same time, they're just limping over the line to the Christmas break. We'll be back in February and try to resurrect our reputation then. But all of this is happening right now. And I don't think Australians are going to be quick to forget this level of ineptitude.
You see, the thing is, obviously, this has been a free kick for Dutton in the moment because a boat has reached Australian shores. But there's no reason the government cannot turn it into a free kick for themselves. Because if we're to assume...
By handling it well.
Exactly. Because if we're to assume this is the only boat that has made it to the country so far, I'm sure plenty of others have tried to make the journey. Now, how many boats out there might have capsized and people have died at sea that we don't know about? And what made Operation Sovereign Borders so successful was not only the boat turnbacks, but the fact that it stopped people dying at sea.
Yes.
It would be so easy for the federal government right now to say, clearly we've found holes in the system, we're going to go and plug those holes and we're going to prevent deaths. It would just feel like a very easy thing for the government to do if they wanted to do it. But again, you know, Anthony Albanese needs advice from the union leaders, and God, if you're stooping to the union leaders for advice, you probably need to go and have a look in the mirror.